In 1906, Dr. William Crawford Gorgas stood in the sweltering heat of Panama, watching workers drop dead in the streets. Yellow fever, malaria, dysentery, cholera. Every day, more men collapsed. Every day, more families received telegrams informing them of a loved one's death in a distant jungle. Gorgas knew the cause, mosquitoes, but almost nobody believed him. The Canal Commission thought he was wasting money. They wanted him fired. Theodore Roosevelt disagreed. Roosevelt told the commission that they had a choice. They could have Gorgas and the canal, or they could have Shantz and nothing. Gorgas stayed. But here's what most people don't know. Even after Gorgas implemented his mosquito control program, even after yellow fever was nearly eliminated, thousands of workers continued to die. Over 5,600 during the American construction phase alone. Add the 22,000 who died during the failed French attempt decades earlier, and the Panama Canal may be responsible for more deaths than any other infrastructure project in American history. More than the Hoover Dam, more than the Brooklyn Bridge, more than the Transcontinental Railroad. And yet, this story is almost entirely forgotten. The workers who died are barely remembered. Their graves disappeared. Their names were erased. Some families never knew what happened. This is the story of the Panama Canal. It's a story of engineering triumph and human devastation. It's a story of ambition overcoming nature, but at a cost that America has never fully acknowledged. Welcome to Hidden America. This is the untold story of the Panama Canal and the forgotten workers who built it. The dream of a canal across the Isthmus of Panama was ancient. For centuries, explorers and traders imagined a waterway that would connect the Atlantic Ocean directly to the Pacific, eliminating the need for ships to sail around South America. The journey around Cape Horn took weeks. A canal could reduce that to days. The commercial and strategic value was obvious. In 1881, the French attempted to build the canal. Ferdinand de Lesseps, the man who had successfully built the Suez Canal in Egypt, led the effort. Lesseps was convinced that what had worked in Egypt would work in Panama. He was catastrophically wrong. Egypt was a desert. Panama was a tropical jungle filled with diseases that 19th century science didn't understand. The French assembled a massive labor force, eventually numbering 40,000 workers. They came from France, Italy, Spain, Colombia, China, and the Caribbean islands. Most were young men seeking to make their fortune. They had no idea what waited for them. From 1881 to 1894, over 22,000 workers died. Some sources suggest the number was even higher. The causes were yellow fever and malaria, diseases carried by mosquitoes. But in the 1880s, scientists hadn't yet made the connection between mosquitoes and disease. Workers were told to avoid night air, to avoid swamps, to avoid all sorts of things. Nobody was told to avoid mosquitoes because nobody understood that mosquitoes were the problem. The French effort collapsed. The company went bankrupt. The workers went home, or never went home at all. Their bodies were buried in mass graves on the isthmus. Many of these graves have never been located. The records of who died and where they were buried were often poorly kept. Many workers had no identification, no permanent address, no known family. They simply disappeared into the tropical earth and the historical record. In 1903, the United States acquired the rights to build the canal. President Theodore Roosevelt made it a national priority. The Americans would accomplish what the French could not. But first, they had to solve the disease problem. The man chosen for this task was Dr. William Crawford Gorgas.
When Gorgas arrived in Panama in 1904, he was immediately met with opposition. The Canal Commission didn't want to spend money on sanitation. They wanted to spend money on excavation. Gorgas faced constant pressure to cut his budget. He was told his ideas about mosquitoes were ridiculous. How could tiny insects possibly kill thousands of people? The commission wanted results. They wanted the canal built quickly and cheaply. Disease prevention wasn't a priority. But Gorgas persisted. He implemented a comprehensive sanitation program. Workers drained swamps and stagnant water where mosquitoes bred. They sprayed oil and insect poison on standing water. They installed screen windows and mosquito netting in buildings. They built new water systems using clean water, not water from contaminated sources. They fumigated buildings. They improved housing and living conditions. The program cost millions of dollars. Gorgas faced constant criticism. Then, in 1905, something remarkable happened. Yellow fever cases began to decline, dramatically. By 1906, yellow fever was virtually eliminated from the canal zone. It was a historic achievement. Dr. Gorgas had done what seemed impossible. He had defeated a disease that had killed thousands. But here's what most people don't know. The benefits of Gorgas's sanitation program were not equally distributed. White American workers received the best housing, the best screening, the best protection from mosquitoes. Black workers, mostly from the Caribbean, were housed outside the mosquito-controlled zone, in tents and tenements. As a result, white workers died at one rate, but black workers died at 10 times that rate. The official records show that during the American construction phase, 5,600 workers died. Of these, roughly 350 were white workers, and 4,500 were black workers. But historians believe the true number was much higher. Many deaths were never officially recorded. Workers who came from distant countries with no family contacts simply disappeared. When they died, there was no one to ask questions, no one to demand official notification. Construction of the canal was brutal. Workers labored in crushing heat, swinging picks and shovels in the Culebra Cut, excavating rock from a mountain ridge that had to be completely removed to create the canal channel. Men worked 10-hour shifts in temperatures exceeding 100 degrees. Accidents were constant. Dynamite explosions killed workers. Steam shovels crushed men. Landslides buried excavation crews. Railroad accidents claimed dozens of lives annually. The psychological toll was equally severe. Workers were isolated in a jungle far from home. Malaria, despite reduced yellow fever, still killed men. Parasitic infections caused debilitating illness. Dysentery ravaged the workforce. Men broke psychologically. Suicide rates among workers were significant, though these deaths were often underreported or classified differently in official records.
The story becomes troubling here. The official death toll of 5,600 is almost certainly low. Historians examining archival records have found significant discrepancies. Workers who were enrolled in the labor force simply disappear from records. They never signed out, they never received final pay, they never appear in any official document after a certain date. Where did they go? Some historians believe they died and their deaths were never recorded. Why would deaths go unrecorded? Several reasons. First, workers with no family contacts in Panama or the United States had no one to demand an official death certificate. If a worker from China died, who would ask questions? Second, the canal company wanted to minimize the appearance of danger to discourage workers from deserting. High death tolls would make recruitment more difficult. Third, many workers were migrants who arrived with little or no identification. When they died, there was no official record of them to begin with. The most troubling discovery came decades later. In 1931, 17 years after the canal opened, workers building a new railroad discovered mass graves near the original construction sites. The skeletons showed evidence of rapid burial, of being dumped into pits without ceremony or individual graves. Some were identified through personal effects. Most were never identified. The official records showed no evidence these mass graves had existed. It was as if these workers had never been officially recorded as dead. One particularly disturbing detail emerged from testimony by an engineer who worked on the canal. In 1909, he witnessed workers being deliberately exposed to disease. Specifically, diseased workers were sometimes kept in crowded housing with healthy workers, allegedly to build immunity. This theory, called the inoculation theory, was completely misguided. It didn't build immunity, it spread disease. Workers died in clusters. When questioned, the Canal Commission denied the practice, but the testimony, documented in personal letters, suggests it happened. There's another troubling aspect to the official history. The canal company had a vested financial interest in minimizing the death toll. Higher death counts meant greater liability for worker compensation. The company deliberately underreported deaths and kept inadequate burial records. Workers who died were sometimes buried anonymously, with no record kept of their identity or cause of death. This made it impossible to track real numbers. Perhaps most significantly, the death toll was racialized. American and European workers' deaths were meticulously recorded. Caribbean workers' deaths were often recorded incompletely or not at all. Chinese workers who died were sometimes simply listed as unknown. This wasn't an accident. It reflected the racism of the era, the belief that some workers' lives mattered more than others, that some deaths needed to be officially acknowledged while others could be forgotten. On August 15, 1914, the SS Ancon sailed through the newly completed canal, marking the official opening. President Woodrow Wilson was invited to attend but declined, citing the expense and risk of travel. Instead, a ceremonial ship carrying dignitaries made the journey. The newspapers celebrated. The canal was hailed as humanity's greatest engineering achievement. Americans congratulated themselves on accomplishing what the French had failed to do. The engineering was indeed remarkable. The canal cut through a mountain, requiring the excavation of over 200 million cubic yards of earth. Engineers built a system of locks that raised ships 55 feet to cross the continental divide, then lowered them on the other side. It was ingenious, complex, and unprecedented. The canal fulfilled dreams that had existed for centuries. It transformed global commerce and had tremendous strategic importance for naval powers. But the human cost was barely mentioned in the celebration. The 5,600 official deaths were noted briefly and then set aside. Workers were thanked for their sacrifice but received minimal compensation. Those who were permanently disabled by disease or accidents struggled to support themselves. Families who had lost loved ones received little help from the American government or the canal company. The workers were forgotten remarkably quickly. Within a generation, the focus had shifted entirely to the canal's economic and strategic significance. The stories of individual workers, the mass graves, the racial inequities in how deaths were recorded, all of this faded from public memory. Americans learned that their nation had accomplished a great engineering feat. They rarely learned at what human cost it had been achieved. Today, the Panama Canal operates as one of the world's most important shipping routes. Over 15,000 ships pass through annually, connecting international commerce. The canal generates substantial revenue for Panama, which took control of the facility from the United States in 2000. It's economically vital to world trade. But the history of workers' deaths has never been fully reckoned with. Historians continue to uncover evidence of mass graves and misrecorded deaths. Recent archaeological investigations have found skeletal remains in locations that official records claim had no burials. DNA analysis and carbon dating suggest some of these remains are from the canal construction era,
but many cannot be identified. The families will never know what happened to their loved ones. The racial inequities in death recording have also become clear. White American workers' deaths were recorded with precision. The date, cause, location, and next of kin were all documented. Black Caribbean workers' deaths were often recorded as simply disease, unknown cause, or in some cases not recorded at all. Chinese workers were particularly invisible, with many deaths never officially acknowledged. Some historians estimate the true death toll could be as high as 25,000 when combining the French and American construction periods. If this is accurate, the Panama Canal may have cost more lives than any other infrastructure project in world history. But because the deaths were spread across different nationalities, different time periods, and because many were never officially recorded, the true total has never been calculated with certainty. The canal also had significant environmental and social impacts. The construction displaced indigenous populations. It disrupted local ecosystems. The canal zone became an American colonial territory within Panama, creating tensions that persisted for nearly a century. The workers who came from the Caribbean were often treated poorly after the construction ended, facing discrimination and economic hardship. In 2000, when the United States transferred control of the canal to Panama, there was supposed to be a reckoning with history, but largely the focus was on the future of the canal, not its past. The workers' stories remained largely untold.
The Panama Canal stands as a symbol of American engineering prowess and global commercial power. Ships pass through every day, moving billions of dollars in cargo. The world economy depends on it. Very few of the people who benefit from the canal know anything about the workers who died building it. Over 5,600 official deaths, possibly 25,000 or more when including the French era and undocumented deaths. Workers from dozens of nations speaking different languages, with no way to contact distant families. Most were forgotten almost immediately after their deaths. Many were buried in unmarked graves. Some disappeared entirely, their bodies never recovered or recorded. The Panama Canal represents both the greatest achievement of American engineering and the greatest human cost of any American infrastructure project. It's a story of ambition, of determination, of persistence in the face of overwhelming obstacles. It's also a story of racism, negligence, and the systemic undervaluation of workers' lives. But here's the final mystery. In 1931, those mass graves were discovered, but the canal company denied they existed. The United States government never investigated. The workers' remains were reburied and then forgotten again. Those graves still exist today, somewhere on or near the canal zone in Panama. Thousands of unidentified workers lie there. Most of their families never learned what happened to them. Next time on Hidden America, we'll explore another piece of American infrastructure with deep historical roots. We'll head to Alaska
and investigate the story of the Alaska Highway, built during World War II at tremendous cost. Thousands of workers, many of them indigenous to the region, suffered and died during its construction. What were the conditions like? What was hidden from official records? And what really happened to the workers who didn't make it home? If you want to uncover more stories of infrastructure built on hidden costs, subscribe to this channel. America's greatest achievements come with stories we've been taught to forget. The canal that transformed world commerce, the roads we drive, the dams that power our cities, they all have histories of sacrifice that deserve to be remembered. Until next time, remember that the Panama Canal carries more than just cargo. It carries the stories of thousands of workers whose names we'll never know, whose sacrifice has been almost entirely forgotten, but whose lives built one of humanity's greatest wonders.